Hey everybody, it's Ben. By request, this is a bonus episode of Tourette's podcast, and let me set it up for you. The Tourette Association of America just had its virtual teen summit. It was on January 9th, 2021, addressing topics and issues that teenagers with Tourette syndrome deal with. And I was one of the speakers they brought on to talk about relevant things I've learned in the course of doing this podcast, specifically on the topics of self-acceptance and the vulnerability that comes with disclosing something different about yourself, especially if it's stigmatized, and what you can do about it. So what you're about to hear is a recording of that session, my remarks at the Teen Summit, along with some audience Q&A. I've done my best to get the audio sounding as good as possible. This was recorded on Zoom, but I think 2020 did us all the favor of getting our ears accustomed to Zoom audio quality. Anyway, thanks to the Tourette Association of America for making the summit possible. They did it for free. Thanks to the support you give to them. And thanks to the big crowd of teens who were on the call with me here. Okay, here it is. And if you need to get up with me, you can use the contact form at tourettespodcast.com. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy.
I'm going to turn it over to Ben. Hi, Ben. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Can everybody see me, hear me okay? Just want to make sure I'm coming through the right way. I'm a little bit frazzled because I had to do some clamoring right before we got started. My webcam decided to die on me, which is a bummer because I was going to have this cool looking cinematic, like blurry background and really blow you away with the production value. And sure enough, the gremlins made sure it wasn't going to happen for me. So I'm just using my smartphone here. I hope it looks okay and hopes it sounds okay. I want to thank everybody who's presented before me and everybody coming up. It was really awesome hearing from some friends I've made in the past, presenters. You know, we heard from Dr. Ken Phelps, who, he's one of the best in the business. And this presentation I'm about to give, I think links up pretty nicely with the different things that he addressed along the way. Extra props to him for using the concept of visuals, which I think this community really benefits from. If you're like me, going the straight kind of academic kind of classroom route is kind of tough. And I'm much better learning things and absorbing things by conceptualizing them, especially with visuals. And I just get there faster, with the kinds of metaphors and analogies that Dr. Phelps was using. So props to him for that. When I started putting this presentation together, I was doing it with a PowerPoint, and I thought midway through that since this is kind of like an offshoot of the podcast, what I'm talking about here today, I thought I would just kind of go ahead and make this kind of like a live podcast episode. So I'm kind of set up here for that. Again, a little bit bummed that the webcam wasn't working, but that's kind of what I'm set up for. So, something I can archive here and maybe release at a later date and include you guys in it if I can. So my remarks here are going to be thorough, but somewhat limited here. And, because I want to interact with you guys. I want to include you guys on the podcast. I want to archive this, maybe release this at some point. People always want to hear more teenagers on Tourette's podcast. And we have, the mother load here today. So get some questions ready. What I'm going to do here is kind of rants. I wrote some bullet points here for myself so I can stay on task. If you're like me, you kind of digress and digress and digress into outer space unless you have some bullet points to work off of. So these are kind of my safety ropes or my bumpers at the bowling alley. So that's what I've got in front of me here that I'll be clinging to for this segment of the Teen Summit. So you're going to hear a whole bunch of almost stream of consciousness type stuff on the concepts of vulnerability and disclosure and self-acceptance. And what I'm hoping is you're able to connect with some of this and relate to it and do something with it. And if you're already way ahead of me on this and you've already done your homework and everything I'm saying to you is old news, I hope you'll take this as kind of like a call to action to help out other people in the Tourette community who are still having a hard time with these kinds of things, with self-acceptance and feeling comfortable about it. New people are getting diagnosed all the time. New people are going for the diagnosis and they have all kinds of fears and apprehensions about what this means for their lives. I'm sure you remember, maybe not. I was a little bit too young when I got diagnosed. I was, I think, 5 or 6 years old. So it's very early on in my memory what these early days like or were like for me. But when I became kind of conscious of what Tourette syndrome was, and kind of what it meant for the world and what my place was in the world, then I felt kind of weird about it. And I wish I had the community that I think you guys have to be able to kind of plug in and feel better about it and feel less alone. So that's kind of one of the things I'm going to be talking about today. Self-acceptance and feeling comfortable with it. So first things first, for anybody who doesn't know, I'm going to say up front that I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm not formally licensed to do anything but drive a car. What I am is a podcast host. I'm a former journalist. I used to be a state house reporter in the capital city of Raleigh, North Carolina. I was a newspaper reporter for a long time. So I was embedded in the legislative building, which is where the House and the Senate make laws. And that's where I worked. And that was a very frazzling thing. I would kind of tick around the clock. And this was at the time period where I was not open about it. I was working with, very understanding, very cool, very smart adults, in the Capitol Press Corps. But I still didn't feel comfortable opening up. I didn't feel comfortable ticking. It just kind of felt like something that I should have hid because of the what if, what if they found out? What are they going to think of me at this point? So I was a journalist for about 13 years, and I basically, in that time, and the reason I bring this up is I basically became a professional interviewer where you learn how to ask difficult questions and often very personal questions of people. And you have to do it in kind of a specific way. You can ask hard questions of people, but you also have to learn how to ask very forgiving questions. And if you're hoping for an honest, vulnerable answer, I kind of have to meet them on that too. I can't just be a robot all the time and expect them to open up wide to me. So I want people to feel okay opening up to me. And this is something that I think bears repeating because I want you guys to feel comfortable with me with whatever questions or comments you have. So that's what I've tried to do, I guess, with Tourette's podcast is create an environment where people with Tourette feel okay about it. Often, for the first time ever, as we heard in the intro, a lot of people I've talked to, or at least heard from over email and social media, they'll tell me that they've never talked about it before because they just don't know how to. They don't know how to disclose it and open it without feeling like all of a sudden they're on display to the world and people are going to treat them differently or look at them differently. And that's the podcast. And this is not me taking credit for that. This is a credit to everybody who's been cool enough to come on the podcast and be vulnerable with me and talk about their personal lives and challenges with Tourette. So this is a credit to them. But, because I've learned so much about how to have these conversations, and the magic ingredient here is vulnerability. It really, really is. The moment that I feel okay about opening up and revealing, I guess, really important and previously secretive details about my life, the easier it is for somebody else to do the same. And they don't even have to have Tourette to figure into that. And I'll get to that. In my neighborhood, at my place of work, basically being, me being more of a vulnerable person, I've made it more comfortable for other people to open up to me and let me know details about their lives that are really, really personal. And again, I'm talking outside the Tourette community, just people I work with, people who live down the street, my colleagues. I think because they know something kind of deep and kind of vulnerable and sensitive about me, they don't feel quite as weird opening up to me, which I think is kind of a strength that all of you guys can have. And I think is a very powerful thing for your future. Please don't forget that. That's a very powerful thing to have. This sense of vulnerability and comfort that people can develop around you, even if you feel awkward in the process. And I still do every single day. That's not the specific goal for me. And that's not the object of what I'm talking about here today. What I am talking about is humanizing ourselves on the up close and personal level, a practice that only seems to have an immediate impact right in front of us, not on a global scale, just between me and the person I'm talking to, or you and the person you're talking to, securing a new bond with people so we can understand each other. And so the people who understand us better as Touretters can pay it forward and, be more forgiving people to the people they might meet in the future, who they might not, maybe they don't understand. Maybe, and again, talking about people outside the Tourette community, if they feel practiced in being vulnerable with me, hopefully they're going to pay that forward and be vulnerable with other people. And that is just, I see Tourette as just such a good core and starting point for all of this to kind of ripple out so we can have a better understanding of each other as people in general. If that makes sense. Okay, let me bounce back into my bullet points here. But so, and again, this applies to, the Tourette community, people who are autistic, you name it. The goal is to encourage the world to lighten up around us. And we are the best ambassadors for doing that. So some disclaimers here. I'm 40 years old now. I don't know what it's like to be a teenager in the year 2021. I talk to a lot of teens by way of the podcast. And so I'm a good listener on what you go through, but I don't know what it's like to be you. I do know that stories I hear from teenagers are just as diverse as the stories I hear from adults these days. Similar challenges, being misunderstood, having to put up with unfair judgments. How do I tell this girl that I like, that I have Tourette, or this guy that I like, or how do I tell my boss? Do I need to tell them? Like, what's the point of this? What's the end goal? Is it just my personal thing or what? But, we're just at different places in our lives. And sometimes I hear from people whose Tourette has actually made them valued and popular because they seem interesting. I was talking with a guy on the podcast, named Bryson. He's kind of getting into the mixed martial arts type thing. I don't think he's a teenager quite yet, but in his school, he's kind of I don't want to call him a curiosity because that has a negative connotation, but people I think appreciate his difference and the energy level that I think he can get from his Tourette. So he does a lot of martial arts and things like that. So it's kind of made him a popular kind of thing to where I don't think, from what I understand, Tourette is not the first thing they know about him. They know him as a guy who does martial arts, who also has Tourette. And that kind of makes Tourette a little bit more interesting to them because it's not the textbook thing. It's not the starting point for them in identifying who he is. Even though Tourette is obviously an identifying factor with a lot of us. So let me ask you guys this, and feel free to chime in with an answer, because so many people I talk to, the vast majority of people with Tourette I talk to, are excellent creatives, whether that's visual arts or music. I don't know if Shakar is out there in the audience. He's the latest episode of Tourette's podcast.
I'm here.
Hey, Shakar, how you doing, man?
Oh, I keep playing the guitar right now.
See? See? So Shakar has his guitar in hand. I mean, it comes up again and again and again. He's the latest episode of Tourette's podcast. Please listen to it. But so visual arts, music, writing, all the above. Do you guys identify with that? You can just put it in the chat. I mean, I have a feeling a lot of us are going to identify with the creative outlet. Not just an outlet, but it's something that we can really just kind of, use and apply in our lives. And I'm seeing yes, 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 yes in the chat, as I expected. Another thing happening in the world right now, such a theme. If you think about all the events that have happened over 2020 and the echoes from the past that have repeated over 2020, is appreciating our differences and coming together to stamp out hate and discrimination. And whether you think Tourette is getting appreciated in that way or not, I think a new avenue, I think there's kind of a new avenue for people to set aside their prejudices and just listen, just have these conversations, listen. And that's kind of why I did Tourette's podcast. There's a bunch of different reasons for doing it, but I'm hoping that anybody from the outside, and I have heard from people on the outside who've done this, who have nothing to do with Tourette. They don't know anybody with it. They don't have it themselves. It's not in their family. But they've listened to it as kind of a curiosity. And in some cases, maybe they tuned in thinking it was going to be funny, like it was the comedy act that we're all familiar with, the way of making fun of Tourette. I think maybe they thought they were going to hear something like that. And they didn't. They heard two human beings talking about things that go on in their lives. And these involuntary factors are so relatable, because everybody's got involuntary factors in their lives. Everybody. And hopefully if you just like Dr. Phelps was saying earlier in the way that you explain, and I like everybody chiming in saying that they grab their instruments and, it's such a strong thing. But But people on the outside can relate to these conversations because they're really humanizing. And I love that we have the internet to make that possible for other people to relate to us in a different way. When I was a teenager, in the period of time that I was opening up about having Tourette, I had to deal with clowns left and right, just people clowning on me. They wouldn't let me be. They wouldn't give it up. In one case, and so yeah, it was a lot of bullying, even when I was closeted about having Tourette. So if you don't know my background, I was open about it when I was a little kid. So this is back in like the mid 1980s until about 1992 when I was maybe 12 years old. After that, when I was kind of forming my identity as a teenager and I didn't want to be misjudged, I didn't want anybody thinking for me about what I am, I bottled it up and I didn't tell anybody about my Tourette syndrome because I was scared. I was ashamed of it. I didn't want the judgment. I didn't want to be seen as someone who would never get a girlfriend, never get a job, never be popular or whatever. Fill in the blank. You know what I'm talking about. And so even when I bottled this up and I kept it quiet to myself, the labor that goes into masking your tics kind of made me even more peculiar in a way and made me, I think, look vulnerable because I valued myself as a vulnerable person who had something to hide, had something to cover up. And people picked up on that. And I got bullied a lot for that, not for my tics, but just for being kind of a different person because of the lengths I went through to cover myself up and make sure people didn't know I ticked. This one guy who was bullying me pretty constantly, I won't say his last name. His name was Michael. He was a big guy. And he kind of slowed it down after I made him feel kind of uncomfortable with it. So I asked him, why are you so obsessed with me? I kind of like looked him straight in the eye. And it was like the one time I thought I was going to get beat up right when I said this, but I just looked him in the eye and said, why are you so obsessed with me? It's like every time you see me, you have to get into my business. That's really weird, man, to be that obsessed with me. And I think I tapped into his insecurity. And I knew that if I didn't exist, he'd be in somebody else's face. There'd be somebody else next in line that he would be bullying. And the problem with him is maybe with something going on in his home life, something that he couldn't control. There might have been some involuntary factor within his family. Maybe he was bullied within his family. So many of the people who become bullies have massive insecurities and fears when they're at home. I've even heard from people, and this may sound strange, but I've even heard from people in the Tourette community say that the insecurities that they've had as Touretters have made them kind of commit acts of bullying to kind of revalue themselves and recast themselves as someone who has a sense of power. And, you know, people feel they need to gain ground by clowning on people because, you know, when I learned that, I started seeing my bullies differently. And whatever they had to say about me, I think had a lot less impact. And it doesn't make it any easier, but it had less impact. And I felt like I understood where they were coming from in a way where I wasn't going to have a conversation with them about it. I wasn't at that point. But it at least let me know, acknowledge to myself that this is not necessarily just about me. I have something that they see as vulnerable, but it's not really just about me. Now, kind of where I'm a hypocrite, you know, when I turned, like I was saying, when I turned about 13, 14, I decided I was going to change how I project myself and be more patient and kind of I was going to try to have the qualities that people would like me for. I wanted to rebrand myself, and that included flaunting my art and my music, and as a sort of smokescreen around my tics, my creativity. I wanted to kind of push that forward, because by that point I was really hiding. I didn't want to give anybody permission to judge me on anything except my merits, my creativity, my sense of humor, whatever it was. So I just kind of went into the closet about my Tourette syndrome, and I hid it, masked my tics, found ways of just kind of disguising it. And in one sense, it worked because, and this is not me endorsing this, but just in the course of telling you my story, because, you know, while there might have been something a little bit peculiar about me that people around me picked up on and in some cases bullied me on, as I was saying, it wasn't outwardly Tourette. And instead, I was viewed as kind of an artist. You know, once I got past that point and fought through the peculiarity being my brand and the way people saw me, when I started kind of, you know, flexing my art, and I don't want to say flaunting it, but I definitely wanted to put myself out there as an artist. And a musician, a painter, a writer, and I found appreciation from people for that, which sounds like a good deal. But what I wish I knew then when I was a teenager, that I know now after reopening my life and letting the world know who I really am, what I have and what I have to deal with. And after hearing from so many people from so many walks of life and age groups, teenagers included, is that I shouldn't have been so fearful about opening up. Even kids at the elementary school age that I've talked to have been owning it. Kids who were 7, 8, 9 have just been on top of it, owning it, finding ways to explain it to people. Just making Tourette their badge to wear. And where I let people kind of see me as an artist, these amazing young people do it all the time at the same time. It means they're kind of focused on their talents. They can get the Tourette out of the way. So people can kind of focus on their talents and other ways of identifying themselves. They're not being shaken into the closet. And through that, they're creating the environment where people around them see Tourette differently. They don't just see, let's just say I'm a teenager and people see me for my talents. They're not just seeing me differently. They're seeing Tourette differently if they know Tourette is something that I have. It's sort of a secondary feature about me, but it makes the art, I think, all the more interesting. I've got Tourette syndrome. Guess what else? I've got talents that maybe you don't have. And that's not to create an air of superiority. That's not what we should be doing. It's to create an air of security where we can focus on what we're good at. And we're good at a lot of things. It's not just creativity. We're good at a lot of things. I'm going to get to this in just a minute. But did you know, and this is according to the science team that helps out the podcast, Tourette syndrome is a candidate for enhanced procedural memory performance. Again, this is coming from the science team. I'm not a scientist myself. But as they tell me, in studies with children with Tourette, they show sequence learning advantages. So the research shows generally that you can learn and remember motor skills, like playing a musical instrument, for example. According to one scientist I talked with, Tourette is the only condition to show this advantage. There may be some, this is a couple years or a few years since I heard this. So, maybe there's been additional research on this. So just kind of take this from me anecdotally, and yeah, I see people chiming in saying that they realize this. That's an advantage over what the scientific literature referred to, typically developing kids. And again, this is not to flaunt any kind of superiority. That's not the goal here. It's to find the confidence to feel okay about our vulnerabilities when we want to show them, if that makes sense. So the good thing is, by involving yourself here and by participating in this summit, you're doing so much more than I was doing when I was a teenager. I feel like you're on the best footing to have TS be the strength in your life that you might privately already know that it is. You can acknowledge it to yourself. Just don't ever doubt it. It's a strength. It's not a weakness. It's a strength. I promise you. And as I say that, I know we all have a different experience than one another, whether you acknowledge to yourself that it's a strength or not. Some of us have, extraordinarily difficult days, unfair experiences, being excluded, and it feels like it can be a lifelong thing. I won't pretend for a moment that being all rah-rah cheerleading about us as cool Tourette people makes everything better, because I know it doesn't. I know it's still going to be difficult. I know after the summit, we're going to feel good about the things we hear, but some of these difficulties are still going to remain. I think the idea is to identify what they are and know that we do have power to negotiate with these difficulties. So that's literally why we're here today. That's why the Tourette Association exists, to advocate for us, to represent us, and to make sure that we're covered. And again, it doesn't cure everything for us when it comes to our daily experiences, but none of you have to go through this alone. There's 1 million people out there here with Tourette. 1 million people. That's a posse. And it's not like Tourette is the only tough thing that people go through in their lives. Again, bullies are the way they are for a reason. The reasons might vary, but whatever the reason is for that individual, has put that individual in a position of having to be combative to people around them and look for people to pick on for some false sense of power and gain. You don't have to do that. That's a thing for them. And all the opportunity, that's all the opportunity that they sadly miss, I think, to be creative and to have community that means anything, and things you have, things you're doing. I hope people who end up being kind of bullying in their lives because of complications that are kind of behind the scenes do find the community they need to get out of that. But so that's, I guess, just kind of a long preamble to say that advocating for yourself is really staying the course and sticking together. Keep learning about yourself. Keep flexing your talents. Take advantage of that enhanced procedural memory, something that you have in yourself. And if you choose to be open with people around you whenever you feel it's appropriate, with the appropriate people, but just make sure that you have a friend who has Tourette to talk to. That's why the podcast, I think, really ultimately exists at this point, to be a reference point for everybody, a place of conversation. Because through these conversations, I've learned so much more about myself. I feel like I've learned more about myself in the past 3 years since the podcast has started than in most of my life preceding it, because again, I was dodging myself and hiding from myself and trying to be something else. I've confirmed things. And I'm not the only person, I guess I've learned I'm not the only person with this weird ear popping tic. I don't know if anybody else out there has it, but I think it was the first episode of Tourette's podcast where I found somebody else who had it. These things that I thought only existed within myself, thoughts that only I had. And yeah, Shikar has the ear popping tic. I'm sure a lot of you do. I'm not the only person who experiences anxiety the way I do. Cameron is saying she does too. She or he, I'm sorry if I misidentified. But by having these conversations, I've thought out what I guess I previously thought was a very permanent sense of isolation. And it was killing me. I'm going to go ahead and say that. It was killing me. Thought I had nobody to talk to who understood. And I didn't want to cross that bridge to even open up to reveal that vulnerability. And Andrew was asking, can you explain how that tic works, the ear popping tic? So as I've been talking, I've probably done it a couple hundred times already. In my left ear, the eustachian tubes in my ear, I basically kind of move them around. It's almost like popping your ear like you're going up a mountain or the plane is taking off or landing. I just kind of do it. Some people have to, like pinch their nose and do it. I can just do it automatically. And when I say automatically, that is to say voluntarily. So yeah, and other people are chiming in. Caitlin, Ruby, it's such a weird tic. And by the way, I did go to the ear doctor and I asked if that was damaging me. And I'm not a doctor, so just take this anecdotally, but they didn't think that was doing me any harm. And my hearing checked out just fine. Turns out that's also kind of a coveted trait for divers, like free divers to have. So it's kind of an advantage too, but even though it's involuntary. But what I didn't have when I was growing up that you guys have to your great advantage is quick access to community. So back in the 1980s, early 90s, these message boards and forums and things like that, they didn't exist like they do today. I firmly believe that if I had this kind of access when I was a kid and had taken advantage of that, sticking with the people who have brains that are like mine, feeling like I had a community of 1 million people who had my back, I wouldn't have felt so isolated and secure. I would have felt like, if I did open up to people about my TS, it would be viewed as me just looking for attention. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that. Nobody asked me to open up, but the shell that I built around myself in hiding my Tourette ended up growing over so many other parts of my life where I became so introverted. I'm still an introverted person. That's just kind of who I am. I've accepted that, but there's negative introversion. And then I think there's kind of positive introversion where you know how to manage it. You know what the strengths are. And you can actually kind of have fun with it in a way. But your TS is nobody's business but yours. Let me also say that. This is your diagnosis. I'm not saying you have to go out into the world and tell people about it, but think about it this way too. If someone opens up and says, hey, I just want to let you know I was diagnosed with a heart condition, the reaction is often kind of sympathy, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like what, you can talk to me about it if you want to. Sometimes we feel that if we open up about Tourette, it's going to lead to the negative judgment and the miscategorization of who we are. And that's really kind of unfair. And that's what I want, what I hope that if you do want to open up to the people around you, that you do kind of transcend that and you have a way of owning it, and you feel, and owning it is really just kind of feeling good and okay about it. And if people can't keep up with you being okay with that, that is not on you. That's totally not on you. The fact that you guys are here today means you're in such a great position for your futures. And I realize that some of you might be loud and proud about it already. And I know some of you have faced difficulty with that, but just remember that with every difficult day, you have a posse. You're not isolated. You're not alone. You're talented. You're the kind of people I wish other people were. And I do mean that. You have the sense of empathy that I wish other people had. And which is why I think the Tourette community has such a great role to play in the world. I'm going to try to wrap up some of these remarks just because I want to get to the questions here. It's 3:30 right now, but I hope in this like waterfall of this avalanche of words, you've caught something that you needed. And if you're already way ahead of me and you're there with it, then I hope you're helping others in the community know that you're going to be out there for them and things are going to be okay for them. Because a lot of people, the anxiety can be horrible. And, you know, if you kind of share that anxiety, then the load isn't quite so bad. So please stick together. Like all of you, please stick together. Please keep talking to one another. The podcast community is here for you. The TAA is here for you. The science community is here for you. And here's something that all of these people together helped me to do early this year. I talked about this, I think, at the beginning of season 5. And this was life-changing for me. Like a lot of you, I deal with depression and anxiety and so on. I'm on medications to treat it, but the depression is always a couple steps ahead of it. And it was really getting out of hand for me. And I would have never thought to voluntarily commit myself to an inpatient hospital to get control of it because of the stigma. The stigma would have been just way too much for me to deal with if I felt isolated in this. The community helped me get past that. Like, you guys helped me get past that. You guys had my back, and I didn't feel quite as weird about that because that's that's just a whole extra level of vulnerability. And what does vulnerability feel like? It's like stepping out into the cold and the door locks behind you and you don't have anything warm to wear and you got to figure it out. And what are people going to think? And I'm suddenly considered, you know, I think my fear was that I would be suddenly considered not fit to work because I'm a liability, because I took the step of really getting after my mental health. I didn't want my boss to know that I was in, you know, a quote unquote mental hospital, because of what they think that might mean for my future. But I talked with so many people your age, people my age. Everyone helped me feel like I was part of a team in doing that, in getting better, because I wanted to get better. And that was a resource that was available to me. So thank you guys for that. I'm going to shut up now, but just remember, vulnerability is what brings about strength. And I got some audio clips. I'm going to see if we can play in just a minute, but vulnerability is what brings about strength and is how we learn about ourselves so we can maximize our potentials when we stick together. Someone on the outside listening might think this is a bunch of feel-good nonsense. Like I'm just trying to like, you know, make everybody feel good. But in our case, I hope it does feel good, but I hope everybody understands that this is not nonsense. And I think we all can kind of trade that. We all know that. This is not nonsense. What I want to do before I open up for questions, and I hope you guys do have some questions about anything you want to know about, just chime in the chat, microphone, whatever, is I want to see if we can play some audio clips from the podcast that I thought were pretty appropriate for today. So Chelsea, if you're able to line this up, the first clip is going to be labeled Hara, H-A-R-A. This is from Tourette's podcast. It might take a moment to line this up, but let's see if we can do this.
Yeah, I'm going to try to play it right now.
I deal with it. I do still have a hard time. And I think that that's something that is always going to it keeps building on. Through life, you kind of learn how to deal with things that you deal with. And it's kind of refinery almost. You learn to refine the things that you say to people. Like, at the beginning, it was difficult to self-advocate. I had to learn how to self-advocate really quickly, and I would just be like, oh, I have Tourette's, but then you start being like, okay, well, it's a neurological condition. I have OCD, anxiety. Like, these are things that are along with it. You learn to kind of refine the way that you talk about stuff. Staying true to yourself is number one. Like, no matter what, people were like, why don't you just say that stuff in your head? Or you don't listen to what I'm saying. Just try not to do that. Staying true to myself was one thing that really helped, with my going through high school sane. Cause I was like, well, this is a neurological condition that I can't control. And even if I try to, I eventually have to get the tics out somewhere. So staying true to yourself and having knowledge in that skill set is really important. I have a Tourette syndrome ID card, just in case, but sometimes I have it in my wallet. Sometimes I don't carry in my wallet. And if somebody asks me what's happening and I don't have my ID card, I'm like, well, the next thing I have is knowledge. Knowledge is number one. And being able to educate others on what you're going through and what you're experiencing. I'm an oversharer. Sometimes I overshare a lot. So maybe I'll be swearing and I'm like, oh, only 15% of people have coprolalia and it's very common. And my psychologist was like, well, sometimes you don't even need to go that far. You can just say, oh, sorry, I have Tourette syndrome, and they probably did it. Then you have that knowledge behind your back. I said it before, but find what you're good at and run with it, and find the people who will support you. If you're not finding it from your friends, if you don't have a lot of friends, you could go to teachers. If you don't have teachers, maybe you have it at home. If you're not at home, then find support groups. I'm in 5 different support groups right now, which might sound insane, but they do really help me. And I feel less alone. And I also found the Tourette podcast, which was like, I was looking for answers anywhere. I was like, wow, I feel like the only person in the entire universe with Tourette syndrome, and I'm having a hard time. Where can I find support? And that's why I was on the Tourette.org website, and I scrolled down and I saw the podcast. I'm like, this is sick. This is awesome. This is what I've been looking for. And yeah, the fact that I'm like even talking to you is cool.
Okay, so let's just play one more clip in the interest of time here. Let's play the clip labeled Adam. And just to set this up, Adam he's older than me. He's an adult, but he's lived with Tourette his whole life. He used to be a VJ on MTV back in the day, and he is the inventor of podcasting. And I want to let you just hear what he says here about this.
No, it's like sometimes the eye ticking, you actually can't see when you close your eyes, so I have to not tick when I'm driving, which is okay. But I'm trying to read something and I'll tick, and then my eye gets cloudy. So I'm trying to work on that one, move it to a different place. That's just something that's, recent, pops up from time to time. At this point in my life, oddly enough, if I were tick free, I think I would miss it. It's a part of who I am. Yeah, it's a part. I wish I had better control over it, but then I think if you have real control over it, then it's not ticking, it's something. That's why it's a feature, man. I don't know. Things are firing in my brain, and if I'm able to subconsciously or unconsciously redirect that energy as we started the conversation off, and I'm redirecting it into developing a certain skill or achieving something that I want to achieve, I'll take it.
So is this, I guess, the same kind of mentality and approach is what sort of led you to start podcasting? And I mean that in every possible sense of the word, start podcasting. I mean, were you just kind of taking it back and seeing where things are going and being, this is something else I got to do?
Yeah, because you know what? Because of you, Ben, and this conversation, I can now, with great certainty, say that Tourette syndrome led to the creation of podcasting. Because once again, it was my ability to visualize an RSS feed with an iPod with some kind of way to point to a media file, a script that could download it without telling anyone, but only notifying the person that something was ready to play when it was downloaded and synced to the iPod, which is the way you used to do it.
Yeah.
Only in that way. I think that is part of my feature. It was able to visualize that, and it's not, to me, it's like, oh, I could see it, actually see this taking place. That's all it takes. There's always got to be someone who just sees that. So I think, I think we can safely say Tourette started podcasting.
And that was Adam Curry, who, again, was a former MTV VJ, and he's credited with the invention of podcasting. I thought that was so cool to hear. I mean, that he would miss it if it went away. So, I hope that's something that a lot of us eventually feel, as difficult as it can be. And I'm going to wrap up with that. It's Eastern time, 3:41 p.m. And if you guys have any questions, I'd love to answer them, or comments or anything like that.
So we were kind of talking about this in the chat, but have you seen any good media that represents either tics or OCD? Because that's something that I really struggled with. Like, I didn't know that I had OCD for a really long time, because the only thing I saw in the media was like an OCD stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's so generalized and often mocked, or just kind of used in kind of a colloquial sense. Like, if someone, likes to keep their house clean, it's, I'm very OCD about that. Like, that's the way people often say it. But I don't think I've seen any perfect media about Tourette and OCD. I don't know exactly what that would look like, just because it's so varied. I do know some episodes of Employable Me I thought were okay. I know that some of them probably had their problems too. I did like, on the podcast, I talked about the movie Motherless Brooklyn, the Ed Norton movie, and I don't think that was a perfect portrayal either. I thought it was a little bit cartoonish at times, but I thought that the theme of it, to where it wasn't dominating him, it was something that people were curious about him for, but he ended up being smart kind of in a different way and appreciated in a different way. I thought that was very nice. And he had a very quick way of explaining it. It's a period picture, so it takes place back in the day. So they don't call it Tourette syndrome. He just says, oh, it's just something I got, and then he moves on with what he was saying or trying to do. He's a detective and he's trying to put this thing together. So I thought his way of kind of owning it in the movie, I thought was a nice portrayal. The tics, again, were a little bit cartoony, but I thought that was a pretty decent one as far as a dramatization of what it's like portrayed by somebody who doesn't have it. And I know that's really kind of precarious, because we want people in the community to be the ones representing ourselves. But when it comes to, Hollywood and the way that all works and the producers and all that, I thought that was kind of a decent portrayal, if that helps.
Okay, so I had a question, and before I ask my question, I have a quick comment, just saying one thing. Speaking of the Motherless Brooklyn, I had never heard of that movie until yesterday. A question came up on Jeopardy about that movie. But no, my question was, I have a tic that I absolutely hate and I want to get rid of. Is there any way to get rid of it? It is a burping tic.
Yeah.
And I put it in the chat earlier, and somebody suggested I turn it into a coughing tic, but small problem. I already have a coughing tic, so now what?
I don't have a quick answer for you. I do know that a lot of people are having success with CBIT and redirecting things and identifying the urge and trying to direct it into something else. Burping is a pretty specific thing. So I don't know what would be kind of like the competing response to that. But I'm glad you asked that aloud, because even though I don't necessarily feel too qualified to answer what that is, maybe somebody in the chat or maybe somebody who's presenting here today might have an answer for you. Cause yeah, that's a pretty specific one. And yeah, I understand not enjoying that.
Yeah, and also, I've noticed that a lot of my tics start from me, like, goofing around and screwing off. Like, there was one day where I was just, like, being goofy with my brother and, like, working on command, and then there we go, now I have a perfect tick. And another day where I was, I don't know, I don't really have any examples because they just come up in conversation when they come up, but, like, let's say, for example, I was obsessively doing, I don't know what, like, or not obsessively doing something, but, like, being goofy with someone and, like, doing something weird, then sometimes it's just I was being goofy with them, and other times it's me being goofy has now turned into a tick. Or whatever I was doing turned into a tick. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. That's something I couldn't turn it off when I was younger. I was always kind of a class clown and a goofball, but in my sense, it was because I think I wanted to act out and kind of flaunt in front of people, authority figures who thought that everybody should be composed and tight and orderly, and I wanted to show them that wouldn't be the case with me. So I kind of use that. Maybe I had kind of a bad attitude about it when I was younger, but I kind of use that to help identify myself and separate myself from the sense of like normalcy and basicness that I think a lot of people were expected to have about themselves.
Zachary Thompson.
Hi, can I ask a question, please?
Absolutely.
Hi. So I asked this question in the group chat and I didn't get, I got a few responses, but I just wonder if anyone struggles with having a trigger that they're always drawn to. For example, the trigger in question here is gaming, which can sometimes trigger a tick attack, but at the same time, it's the main source of enjoyment. So when we are having a tick attack, that's the main thing that we want to do, even though it makes it worse and it exacerbates the entire situation. So if anyone has any tips or advice how to work with something like that, that'd be helpful.
I relate to that personally. When I get really kind of stimulated by something or excited by something, the tics definitely start to come out. I feel excited and it's expressed with a series of tics. Like a lot of vocal tics, kind of like that. But in my case, they don't bother me quite as much, and I kind of take them as a sign I've almost associated them with happiness and that I'm enjoying what I'm doing. If it's something that bothered me, that would be a little bit different. But in my case, it's almost just kind of like an identifier that I'm kind of feeling good in the situation. Yeah, I also tick when I'm feeling stressed out, but in my case, the trigger that I'm drawn to would be editing or audio editing or doing certain things that are kind of fast action that I'm very quick and good at that involve multi kind of sensory things. The tics will really kind of come out, but I think because I'm so zoned into it, the tics don't bother me quite as much, if that makes sense. And that's just me speaking for myself.
Thank you.
So I can probably answer that question, honestly. Like, I'm going to put this in a different perspective. My tics usually come out in school. So, and I'm in high school, and I was just diagnosed last year, and it was my freshman year. And my tics would just stand out when I was, like, in the hallways, like, with large groups of people. And I kind of just had to let them go. Or if I had like a close friend nearby, or someone that I know that's like in need of a hug, because I usually give people hugs, and I'll give them a hug or something, and people will ask me if I'm okay. But the point is, sometimes you just gotta let it out. I feel when you have your tics, like, to not be ashamed of them, maybe. Because, I mean, I swear my tics too, but I try and just let it out, and eventually I know it will go away for a minute.
Yeah, just kind of diffuse it.
Yeah.
Let the air out of the balloon. Anybody else have any? Yeah.
I have a trigger. Whenever my family says, like, I love you, or, sorry, whenever I hear it or like I say it or whatever, my tics always get a lot worse. Like they just like fire up all of a sudden. So we went down to now sign language when we do that because I've gotten tic attacks from that before and it's not fun.
And that's helped you?
Mm-hmm. And actually, like she said, gaming gets your tics worse. Gaming is actually a relief from my tics because my tics always slow down whenever I'm on screens or like that sort of thing.
I found kind of like the opposite of having like and like I watch Monty Python Holy Grail whenever I have a tic attack. And so that's something that I've found kind of like it helps me calm down. So I have like a set thing that I do and it helps me calm down. And like, so now I've kind of associated that, like that one movie with calming down. Like, so I have like, for me, it's movies, or sometimes textures, but I have like set things that I do when I'm feeling a certain way. And I found that to be really helpful.
That's cool. That's a good option, Monty Python. I think just because like you're diving into this like absurdity, which that movie is, you know, it just kind of feels like home.
When I'm at home, I try to use because I play the trombone, so I try to use music as my distraction. So if I'm having a tic, I'll pick up my trombone and start playing it and just enjoying it. For if I'm at school, I try and just ground myself, and just take deep breaths, and just maybe like take a walk or something, and it helps me. Or just not think about the tics, and just think about something else, like how can I improve this, or how am I doing? You know, I just try and get my mind off of it.
Yeah, that's the thing about music for me too, and I have to be careful about it because I have such a strong, I guess, like emotional reaction to different kinds of music. It almost like instantly changes my mood if I hear different kinds of minor chords playing versus major chords, and I respond so heavily to that. But there are, you know, certain kinds of music, certain bands, certain things that I really link with that do seem to work for me when I have a sense of anxiety or stress or something that might be setting off my tics that really do work really medicinally. I mean, it's definitely not something to underplay.
I kind of relate to Cameron because video games actually do help me reduce my tics. And so does music. So whenever I get anxiety attack or a tic attack, I listen to music and try to play video games to get my mind off of it. But one of my triggers actually is heat. And it really sucks because I do karate and then that gets my heart rate up. And that just gets me more hot. And then if I practice too much, then I'll get an anxiety attack.
Wow. Do you have ways to kind of counter that? Like, I mean, it may be kind of difficult because, you know, you want to get into the zone, but wow, that's tough.
There really is no way to counter it except the medicine I have. But after 11 years, I'm finally a black belt. So
nice, man. Congrats. That's awesome. That's awesome. It's like an extra level of discipline that came with it.
I actually kind of find it funny that one of his triggers was heat because it's the exact opposite for me. I have to keep myself warm constantly or else I'll have a tic attack. And so, like in school, I'll bring a jacket every day and I'll bring a weighted blanket because that adds extra heat on top. I'm more like you. I'm really sensitive to cold, and that's I get really jittery when I'm cold, and that translates into ticking. That's when I have the most painful tics, I think, too. Just the neck jerking and the tensing and all that. And that's, heat is something, you know, if I don't want to overheat myself, but definitely warmth is something that kind of calms me down.
I have a tic that flares up every now and again, and like I put it in the chat, it was about whenever I'm extremely excited about something, then I have tick attacks, and I'll have one that involves me like putting my hands behind my face or doing whatever. And my nose will often turn red from my hands rubbing against it so often. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I had something like that too, where I used to mess with my lips all the time, and it made me look like Ronald McDonald for a little bit, just because I chapped myself so much.
I have another question. Does everyone, because I have trouble falling asleep at night, especially like with my tics and like anxiety wise. So I was just like wondering, like, do you guys like have problems falling asleep? And if you do, like, what do you do to like calm yourself down to sleep? Because I always use relaxing music, and then I have to use my weighted blanket to like put weight on me.
Exactly what I have the same problem. How many people just talked at once having the same problem?
So my bed used to be on a wall, next to a cement wall, and then we rearranged it because of something. But I used to have like kind of like a pillow on my wall because my tics were so bad at night. I hit my head on the wall, and so now I can't do that. So I always fall off the bed. But I kind of tried. I use relaxing music to just try and calm myself down, or melatonin. That helps too, to help you sleep, and it also helps you relax. So that's for my perspective.
And I was just gonna say that I don't exactly have troubles falling asleep, but when I'm trying to get to sleep, that's when my ear popping tic like happens. Otherwise, it like doesn't happen the rest of the day. Except for right now, it just happened because I was thinking about it. But again, I have to plug my nose to do it. But yeah, that's like the only time it happens is when I'm trying to fall asleep. But
I have a tip where I do backflips when I go to bed. That one's hard. Wow. Yeah, that one's really. Fuck off, Mike. Ew. Sorry. Ew. Sorry. Ew. So, fuck. Ew. Sorry.
Backflips.
Yeah, backflips.
I want that tick now. That just sounds awesome.
No, you don't. It hurts so bad.
In terms of the sleeping one, like, I mean, this may just be typical, but I can't go to sleep when there's no noise. Like, I can't go to sleep with no noise. So I take a fan and I put it on like the highest setting, and I listen to that fan go, and that's what puts me to sleep at night, because I have to have some white noise in the background.
That's the same for me. I put like my phone on, but it's because of my tics, because like the white noise will like soothe my tics, so I'm not like crazy at night.
Yeah, I always play like very low, very like calming, relaxing music every night, or else I like can't fall asleep. And if I wake up in the night, I have to turn it back on because like I just like can't get to sleep without some noise.
I have the same way. Troubles falling and staying asleep. So whenever I put in my headphones and I listen to music, but it's the opposite for me. I don't put in calming music. I put music that I like, which is basically party music and dance music, and somehow that helps me fall asleep, ironically.
I have like a whole sleeping setup that I have, where it's like I have the weighted blanket to calm my tics, and I have like a normal pillow along with a neck pillow, so that way I don't snap my neck back while I'm trying to fall asleep. And I also usually have the TV going, because the noise from the TV helps me fall asleep. Fuck you! The noise from the TV helps me fall asleep. And so I have like a whole setup that I have to go through every night in order to make myself go to sleep.
Ritual.
I'm the same, like with the weird music. Sometimes I will have bagpipes going, because I love the bagpipes, or I have marching band music, which is usually that. So there's different types of music usually going around in my room.
Guys, I'm so sorry to interrupt everybody, but we do have to wrap up this session just because we have another one starting right now at 4 o'clock Eastern Time. But we will be able to answer more questions in the next segment, and Ben will be back for the burning questions panel right at the end, so you'll get to speak with Ben more then. So thank you so much to Ben. Everybody, we're going to transition over to the next.
Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Tourette's podcast is made possible by the Tourette Association of America, online at tourette.org. We're also on the Geeks Rising podcast network. That's geeksrising.com. That's where you can find all the past episodes of Tourette's podcast. Talk to you next time. This is Ben.